When I'm strong enough to protect you, I'll marry you.
I will wait for you.
I was on my knees on cold marble when Italy's most dangerous mafia boss knelt beside me. The ring, my ring, the one a 12-year-old orphan boy had twisted from stolen copper wire 20 years ago, had just been ripped off my finger and thrown across the floor like garbage. The woman who did it was laughing. Her friends were laughing. 200 of Europe's wealthiest criminals were watching a black American maid scramble on the ground, and nobody was stopping them. Then I heard footsteps. The entire room went silent. Not the polite kind of quiet, the kind where people stop breathing because a predator just entered the space. Cristiano Greco. Il Lupo Nero. The Black Wolf. The mafia boss who owned the villa I cleaned. The man who'd eliminated 17 threats that month without blinking. The Don who made grown men beg for mercy they never received. He walked past senators, past rival crime families, past everyone who mattered in his world. And he knelt down on the floor. Next to me. His hand found the copper ring before I did. If you've ever wondered whether monsters can remember who they used to be, grab your popcorn and stay with me. Because what happened next changed everything. Let me tell you how a black girl from Baltimore ended up working as a maid in a Roman mafia boss's villa, wearing a promise a boy made when we were both too young to understand what promises cost. My name is Shirley Jameson, and 3 weeks before that night, I had walked into Cristiano Greco's home knowing exactly who he was. See, I'd spent 20 years trying to forget a 12-year-old boy with scared eyes and gentle hands who'd protected me in Casa dei Bambini orphanage in Naples. I was 9 when my missionary parents died in a car accident outside Rome. 9 years old, alone in a foreign country, dark-skinned in a place that didn't know what to do with me. The orphanage took me in, but the other children didn't. Except for one. Cristiano Rossi. That was his name then, before the Greco family claimed him, before he became Il Lupo Nero. Was only 12, but he stood between me and every kid who tried to hurt me. He shared his food when I was hungry. He taught me Italian phrases to help me survive. And on Christmas Eve, when neither of us received any gifts, he gave me something he'd made himself. A ring. Copper wire he'd stolen from the maintenance room, twisted around a small turquoise stone he'd found in the courtyard. His hands had bled making it. I'd torn a strip from my dress to bandage his fingers, and he'd looked at me like I'd given him the world instead of a piece of cloth. When I'm strong enough to protect you forever, he'd whispered in broken English he'd been practicing for weeks. I'll marry you, Shirley. I promise. I wore that ring every day for 20 years. Even when I heard what he'd become. Even when I learned that the boy who'd shared his last piece of bread with a scared little black girl had grown into a man who ordered executions before breakfast. Even when every rational part of my brain screamed that Cristiano Rossi was dead and only Il Lupo Nero remained. 2 weeks after Christmas, a black car had pulled up to Casa dei Bambini. The Greco family, one of Italy's most powerful mafia clans, had come for him. I watched from the dormitory window as 12-year-old Cristiano climbed into that car without looking back. Without saying goodbye. Without even a glance at the 9-year-old girl who'd believed every word of his promise. The orphanage director told me later what the deal had been. They'd give him everything: power, wealth, a family name that commanded fear, if he erased his past completely. No contact with anyone from before. The boy from Casa dei Bambini had to die so Cristiano Greco could be born. He chose the car. I don't blame him. What 12-year-old wouldn't? But I kept the ring anyway. I built a life in America. Got adopted by a church family in Baltimore, finished school, learned to be invisible in the way that keeps black women safe in spaces that don't want them. I became a housekeeper because invisible was what I knew how to do. Invisible kept me employed. Invisible kept me alive. Then 5 years ago I saw his face in an international news article. Cristiano Greco, Don of the Greco crime family, expands operations across southern Europe. His eyes were harder. His jaw sharper. Everything soft about that 12-year-old boy had been carved away and replaced with marble and violence. But I knew those eyes. I'd seen them looking at me with something like love when we were children who had nothing. I told myself to forget again. I told myself he was a stranger now, a killer, a man who'd buried every trace of who he used to be under 20 years of blood and power. But I couldn't stop thinking about one question. Was any part of that boy still alive inside the monster? I needed to know. Not because I wanted him to keep his promise. God, I'd stopped believing in that promise the day I learned what he'd become. Not because I thought he owed me anything. but because I needed to see for myself whether choosing power had destroyed him completely, or whether some small piece of the boy who'd bled for me still existed. So when a position opened in his household staff, housekeeper needed, no questions asked, discretion essential, I applied under my married name. Right, not Jameson. An American with Italian language skills and 15 years of experience working for wealthy families. They never asked why I wanted the job. In his world, people don't ask questions. They just survive. I arrived at his Roman villa on a Tuesday morning carrying one small bag and wearing the copper ring on my right hand, hidden in plain sight. The head of household showed me to the staff quarters, explained the rules. No conversation unless addressed, no presence in rooms the Don occupied, no personal effects in common areas. Perfect. Invisible was what I did best. I didn't expect him to recognize me. 20 years is a lifetime. The scared 9-year-old black girl he'd protected had become a 29-year-old woman who knew how to disappear into wallpaper. I'd lost the baby fat, gained the careful posture of someone who'd learned to take up as little space as possible. But I recognized him immediately. Not just his face, though those eyes, even cold and calculating now, were the same ones that had looked at me with fierce protectiveness when we were children. It was the way he moved. Controlled. Deliberate. Like violence was always one decision away. The boy who'd stood between me and bullies had become a man who embodied the threat itself. For the first week, I don't think he noticed me at all. I moved through his villa like a shadow, cleaning surfaces, organizing spaces, preparing meals with the simple flavors I remembered from the orphanage. Not because I was trying to trigger his memory. I cooked what felt like home. Our home. The one we'd dreamed about on that orphanage rooftop 20 years ago. I watched him through doorways. Saw him stare at frescoed ceilings at 3 a.m. like sleep was something he'd forgotten how to do. Heard him give orders in cold, clipped Italian that made his soldiers flinch. Observed the careful control he maintained over every detail of his life. The temperature, the lighting, the exact angle of objects on his desk. A 12-year-old orphan boy who'd had no control over anything had become a 32-year-old man who controlled everything. On the 8th night something changed. I was preparing his dinner. Pasta aglio e olio, simple, the kind of meal we used to imagine eating when we finally escaped. And I heard something I hadn't heard since I'd arrived. Silence. Not the tense silence of a man forcing himself to stay awake. The deep, even breathing of actual sleep coming from his bedroom upstairs. I stood there with the wooden spoon in my hand and felt something crack open in my chest. Some part of him recognized me. Even if his conscious mind didn't, his body remembered safety. That's when I knew he'd eventually figure it out. Men like Cristiano Greco don't miss details. They don't survive by being unobservant. Sure enough, on day 12 I caught him watching me on the security monitors. I'd walked past his study and seen the reflection in the window. Him frozen at his desk, staring at footage of me cleaning the kitchen. Staring at my hand. At the ring. I'd kept my composure, finished my work, returned to my quarters. And I'd waited. Because I knew what would come next. I knew him. Not the Don, not Il Lupo Nero. I knew the boy underneath. The one who tested things before confronting them. The one who gathered evidence before making decisions. He'd test me. Leave clues. Watch my reactions. And he did. First came the turquoise stone, polished and perfect, placed on his desk like a forgotten trinket. I'd paused for exactly 4 seconds when I saw it. Long enough to let him know I recognized it, not long enough to break character. Then came the music. Fenesta Vascia. The Neapolitan lullaby the orphanage had played every night at bedtime. I'd stood at his study window for a full minute, remembering a rooftop and stars and a boy's promise, before I'd forced myself to keep dusting. The photograph was the dangerous one. He'd left it face up on his desk. All of us, the orphanage children, squinting into winter sun. Him in the back row trying to look tough. Me 3 rows ahead, barely visible, my face half turned toward where he stood. I'd picked it up with shaking hands, traced our faces with my thumb. 9 and 12, too young for the world to have broken us yet. And I'd understood what he was really asking. Do you know who I am? Do you know what I've become? I'd placed the photograph back exactly where I'd found it and walked away without a word. Because yes, Cristiano. I knew exactly who you were. Both versions. The boy and the monster. And I was still trying to figure out if one had completely devoured the other. I'd planned to observe for a few more weeks. Gather my answer quietly. Leave before either of us had to face the 20 years of silence between us. But then came the peace summit. 5 Mafia families gathering under one roof to prevent a war. Tensions running so high you could taste gunpowder in the air. And staffing shortages that forced me out of the shadows and into a simple black dress, carrying champagne through a ballroom full of Europe's most dangerous criminals. I should have known better. Invisible only works when you're supposed to be there. Put a black American maid in a room full of Italian crime families, and you become hypervisible. Isabella Santoro spotted me like a shark scenting blood. And that's how I ended up on my knees, watching a mafia boss kneel beside me to retrieve a promise made by an orphan boy who wasn't supposed to exist anymore. The villa smelled like violence dressed in expensive cologne. I noticed it the moment I stepped through the servants' entrance that first Tuesday morning. That particular scent of fear that clings to places where men make decisions about who lives and who disappears. The marble was too white, polished so obsessively you could see your reflection. The silence was too perfect, the kind that comes from people knowing exactly what happens when they make noise. This was Il Lupo Nero's territory. The Black Wolf's den. Antonio, the head of household, led me through corridors that stretched like arteries through the villa's heart. He was thin, nervous, the type of man who'd learned to survive by becoming invisible. I recognized that skill immediately. We were the same species, he and I, shadows who kept dangerous men comfortable. The dawn requires absolute discretion, Antonio said in Italian, his voice barely above a whisper. You do not speak unless spoken to. You do not enter rooms he occupies. You leave no trace of your presence. Do you understand? I nodded, adjusting the small bag on my shoulder. Inside was everything I owned that mattered. 3 changes of clothes, my American passport, and the copper ring currently hidden in my pocket. I'd take it out later, wear it openly once I was alone. But for now, I needed Antonio to see exactly what he expected. A quiet American housekeeper grateful for work. The previous staff. Antonio hesitated, his eyes darting toward a closed door at the end of the hallway. They made mistakes. The dawn does not tolerate mistakes. I understand, I said in perfect Italian. His eyebrows rose slightly. Good. Let him think I was just competent enough to be useful, not interesting enough to remember. He showed me to my quarters. A small room off the kitchen with a single bed and a window overlooking the gardens. Sparse. Clean. Safe. Everything the orphanage hadn't been. You begin immediately, Antonio said. The dawn breakfast's at 7. He is particular about his coffee. After he left, I stood at the window and watched Rome spread below like a kingdom. Somewhere in this villa, Cristiano Greco was giving orders, signing documents, maybe deciding whether someone lived or died today. The boy who'd shared his bread with a hungry 9-year-old girl had become the man who controlled an empire built on fear. And I had walked directly into his house wearing the promise he'd made when we were children. I took the ring from my pocket and slid it onto my right hand. The copper had worn smooth over 20 years. The turquoise stone chipped at one corner from the day he'd found it. My finger knew its weight the way lungs know breath. Familiar. A reminder that once someone had thought I was worth bleeding for. Even if that someone had become a monster. That first week, I moved through the villa like water. Present but unnoticed, essential but invisible. I learned the rhythm of his world quickly. Cristiano rose at 5, worked in his study until 7, took breakfast alone while reading reports that made his jaw tighten. He spoke in clipped Italian to men who appeared at his door with problems that required solutions I didn't want to imagine. I watched him the way you watch a storm building on the horizon, with fascination and appropriate fear. He was beautiful in the way dangerous things are beautiful. Tall, lean, all sharp edges and controlled violence. His suits were custom, perfectly fitted, the kind of expense that whispers rather than shouts. But it was his eyes that stopped me the first time I saw him up close. Dark. Calculating. Haunted by things that lived in them when he thought no one was looking. I recognized those eyes. They were older, harder, emptied of softness. But they were his. He didn't see me that first week. I made certain of it. I cleaned rooms he'd already left, prepared meals that appeared while he was in meetings, vanished before he entered spaces I'd just perfected. The invisibility I'd spent 20 years mastering became my greatest asset. But something strange started happening on the 8th night. I was in the kitchen preparing his dinner. Pasta aglio e olio, simple, the kind of meal we used to dream about in the orphanage when hunger made us creative. Garlic, olive oil, red pepper flakes, a squeeze of lemon. Comfort food for people who remembered when comfort was rare. I wasn't trying to trigger his memory. I just cooked what felt like home. That night, I heard something I hadn't heard since I'd arrived. Silence from upstairs. Not the tense silence of a man staring at the ceiling, fighting sleep. The deep, even rhythm of actual rest. Cristiano Greco was sleeping. I stood there with the wooden spoon in my hand, listening to the absence of pacing, the absence of ice clinking in glasses at 3 in the morning, the absence of that particular quality of wakeful misery. Some unconscious part of him had recognized safety, which meant some unconscious part of him recognized me. The next morning I found him in the kitchen when I arrived. He stood by the espresso machine, perfectly dressed despite the early hour, reading something on his tablet. I froze in the doorway. "Buongiorno," he said without looking up. His voice was deep, controlled, accented with Naples buried under years of careful refinement. "Buongiorno, Don Greco," I replied, keeping my eyes down, my posture submissive. "Antonio tells me you cook well." Still not looking at me. Last night's dinner was acceptable. Acceptable. High praise from a man who'd probably never used the word delicious in his life. "Grazie, signore." He nodded once, dismissing me without another glance. I moved past him to begin preparing his breakfast, hyper-aware of his presence 6 feet away. He smelled like expensive soap and something darker, gunpowder maybe, or just the particular scent of power. I made his espresso exactly as Antonio had instructed. Ristretto, no sugar, served at precisely 90 degrees. When I placed it on the counter beside him, my hand was steady. His fingers brushed mine as he took the cup. The contact lasted less than a second. But in that moment I felt electricity arc between us. Recognition maybe, or just proximity to danger. His hand stilled. I pulled back quickly, professionally, and returned to the stove. When I glanced up, he was staring at the espresso like it had personally offended him. No, not the espresso. At his hand. Where my fingers had touched his. I turned back to the eggs. I was scrambling, my heart pounding so hard I was certain he could hear it. But when I risked another look, he was gone. The espresso sat untouched on the counter, cooling in the morning light. That night he slept for 8 hours straight. By the 3rd week, I'd established a routine that kept me invisible but somehow essential to his household. The villa ran smoother. The meals appeared on time. The spaces he occupied seemed to breathe easier, though I couldn't explain exactly what I'd changed. Antonio noticed. "The Don seems calmer," he said one morning, suspicion and relief warring in his voice. I said nothing. What could I say? That a mafia boss was sleeping because some broken part of him remembered when a 9-year-old girl had made him feel safe? But Cristiano noticed too. I could tell because he started appearing in rooms I was cleaning. Not approaching me. Not speaking. Just present. Standing in doorways. Sitting at his desk while I dusted shelves. Lingering over breakfast while I prepared lunch. Watching me. I kept my eyes down, my movements efficient, my face carefully blank. But I felt his gaze like a physical touch, studying me with the same intensity he probably used when deciding whether someone was a threat. And then on a Thursday evening during my 3rd week, everything changed. I was cleaning his study, a room I usually avoided because it felt too much like invading the center of his power. Dark wood, leather, books in Italian and English about strategy and war. His desk was obsessively organized. Every pen parallel, every document aligned. I dusted carefully, methodically, trying not to disturb the perfect order he'd created. That's when I noticed the security monitor on the side table, angled just slightly toward where I was working. The screen showed multiple camera feeds from throughout the villa, including one from the kitchen. From earlier that day, showing me at the counter, my right hand clearly visible as I chopped vegetables. Showing the copper ring with its chipped turquoise stone catching the afternoon light. The footage was paused. Zoomed in. Focused entirely on my hand. On his promise. I stopped breathing. Somewhere in this villa, Cristiano Greco was watching me on another screen, waiting to see how I'd react to discovering that he'd seen. That he'd noticed. That he was paying attention to the one detail I couldn't hide. I finished dusting the bookshelf with hands that trembled only slightly. Then I left the study, closed the door quietly behind me, and returned to my quarters. I didn't take off the ring. If he wanted to know why his housekeeper wore a piece of worthless copper jewelry, he'd have to ask me directly. But I knew he wouldn't. Not yet. Because Cristiano Greco hadn't survived 20 years in the Mafia by making moves before gathering all available intelligence. He'd test me first. Watch me. Confirm what his instincts were screaming at him. And I would let him. Because I'd come here for the same reason he was watching those recordings obsessively. We both needed to know if any part of what we'd been to each other had survived. That night I heard him pacing upstairs until dawn. The ghosts were back. The test started 3 days later. I found the first one on his desk during my morning cleaning. A small turquoise stone, polished smooth, placed carefully next to his fountain pen like it had always belonged there. The color was exact. The size was right. Could have been a twin to the stone in my ring. My hands stilled on the dust cloth. This wasn't random. Cristiano Greco didn't do random. Every object in his world had a purpose, a place, a reason. This stone was a question. Do you remember? I picked it up slowly, let the weight of it settle in my palm. The surface was cool, smooth, nothing like the rough chip he'd found in the orphanage courtyard 20 years ago. But the color, God, the color was identical to the Naples sky right before sunset, when everything turned turquoise and gold and we'd sit on the roof and pretend we could see all the way to America. I stood there for exactly 4 seconds. Long enough for whatever camera was watching to record my reaction. Long enough for him to see the recognition flash across my face before I controlled it. Then I set the stone back down, perfectly aligned with where I'd found it, and continued dusting. When I left the study, I didn't look at the security camera mounted in the corner. But I felt its lens on me like a touch. Message received, Cristiano. I know what you're asking. That evening, I made him risotto alla Milanese. Another orphanage dream meal, the kind of thing we'd whispered about when the nuns served us watery soup and stale bread. Saffron, butter, parmesan. Comfort in a bowl. I didn't see him eat it. I never did. But the next morning the dish was clean, scraped so thoroughly it looked like it had been licked. The second test came 4 days later. I was cleaning the hallway outside his study when music started playing inside. Not the classical pieces that usually drifted through the villa. This was different. Older. A woman's voice singing in Neapolitan dialect, the words thick with longing and loss. Finesse de Vascia. The lullaby from Casa dei Bambini. My hands froze on the picture frame I was straightening. That song. That exact recording with its scratchy quality and the slight skip at the second verse where the orphanage's ancient CD player had been damaged. Sister Maria used to play it every night at 8 o'clock, her signal that bedtime was coming whether we were ready or not. Cristiano and I would lie in our separate dormitories, listening to that song drift through the walls, and somehow it made the darkness less frightening. Because we were hearing the same thing. Together even when we were apart. I walked to the window at the end of the hallway, my feet moving without permission from my brain. The song swelled behind me, that achingly beautiful voice singing about windows that wouldn't open, about love that couldn't reach, about distance that couldn't be crossed. Rome spread below the window, golden in the afternoon sun. But I wasn't seeing Rome. I was seeing Naples. The cramped courtyard. The rust-stained walls. The roof where a 12-year-old boy with scared eyes had promised me forever. I stood there for a full minute, not moving, barely breathing. Let him see this, I thought. Let him watch me remember what we were before the world taught him to kill. When the song ended, silence filled the villa like a held breath. I straightened my shoulders, picked up my cleaning supplies and moved to the next room. But my eyes were wet and I knew the cameras caught that too. The third test was the most dangerous. I found it on a Tuesday afternoon, left carelessly on his desk like he'd been looking at it and forgotten to put it away. A photograph. Old, creased at the corners, colors faded to that particular quality of pictures from another era. Casa dei Bambini Orphanage, winter 2005. All of us lined up in front of the building, squinting against the sun. Sister Maria on one end, trying to make us look presentable for whatever photographer had been documenting the orphanage that year. Older kids in the back row, younger ones sitting cross-legged in front. And there. Back row, fourth from the left. Cristiano Rossi, 12 years old, trying so hard to look tough. His hair was longer then, falling across his forehead. His clothes were too big, donated items that never quite fit. But his eyes, even in the faded photograph, even across 20 years, his eyes were the same. Dark, watchful, protecting something. 3 rows ahead of him, barely visible between 2 taller girls, was a small black child with cornrows and a dress that had been mended so many times the original fabric was hard to identify. Me, 9 years old, looking not at the camera but over my shoulder toward the back row. Toward him. I picked up the photograph with both hands, held it like it might crumble to dust. My thumb traced across the faces of children I'd tried so hard to forget. Marco, who used to steal food. Teresa, who'd cried every night for a mother who never came. Giovanni, who'd made it his mission to make my life miserable until Cristiano had broken his nose. So many of them. Where were they now? Who had they become? And then my thumb stopped. On him. On me. On the distance between us that had felt insurmountable then and felt even wider now. He'd kept this photograph. Through the adoption, through the name change, through 20 years of becoming someone else. He'd kept this one piece of evidence that Cristiano Rossi had existed. That we had existed. Tears slid down my face before I could stop them. I didn't wipe them away. If he was watching and I knew he was, then let him see. Let him know that the 9-year-old girl in that photograph had grown into a woman who still remembered every promise, every moment, every reason she'd learned to survive. I set the photograph down exactly where I'd found it, aligned perfectly with the desk's edge. Then I emptied his wastebasket with shaking hands and left the study. I made it to my quarters before the sobs came. As I knew now, beyond any doubt, Cristiano Greco had recognized me. Probably from the first day or the first week, or the moment his unconscious mind had relaxed enough to let him sleep. He knew exactly who I was. And he was still testing me instead of talking to me. Which meant he was afraid. Il Lupo Nero, the man who made grown men beg for mercy, was terrified of a conversation with a housekeeper who wore a copper ring. I should have left then. Should have packed my bag and disappeared before this went any further. I gotten my answer. Yes, some small part of the boy still existed inside the man. Wasn't that enough? But it wasn't. Because I'd seen something else in those tests. He wasn't just checking if I recognized the clues. He was checking if I'd stay silent. If I'd protect his secret the way I'd protected him in the orphanage. If I'd remain invisible, complicit, safe. He was testing whether I'd choose him over my own voice. And God help me, I was passing his test. Every single one. Because part of me, the part that had worn his ring for 20 years, the part that had traveled across an ocean to see if he was still human, that part of me understood why he needed the test. Why he couldn't just knock on my door and say, I know who you are. Cristiano Greco's entire empire was built on control and fear. Admitting that a housekeeper had the power to destroy his carefully constructed identity? That was vulnerability he couldn't afford. But Cristiano Rossi, the 12-year-old boy who'd bled making me a ring? That boy had been nothing but vulnerable. The question was, which one was I working for? That night I heard him pacing again. Back and forth like a wolf in a cage. I lay in my small bed and listened to his footsteps above me and thought about all the ways we were both trapped. Him and his empire of violence. Me and my need to know if anything real had survived. The distance between our rooms was maybe 30 feet. The distance between who we'd been and who we'd become was impossible to measure. But the ring on my finger was still the same weight it had been 20 years ago. And that had to mean something. I'd been in the villa for 3 weeks when Antonio pulled me aside after breakfast. The Don has asked about you, he said quietly, his eyes darting toward Cristiano's study. My heart stopped. Asked what? Your background. Your references. Where you worked before. Antonio's hands twisted together nervously. I told him what was in your file. American, 15 years with elite families in New York. Impeccable discretion. Was there something I should have mentioned? No, I said carefully. That's all correct. He studied me with eyes that had learned to read danger. Be careful, Shirley. The Don doesn't usually take interest in household staff. When he pays attention to someone, it's either because they're useful or because they're a problem. I'll be careful, I promised. But careful was becoming impossible. Because that afternoon I found the 4th test. And this one wasn't a question. It was a confession. The small wooden box sat on the kitchen counter, old and worn, the kind of thing you'd keep treasures in when treasures were rare. I'd been preparing his lunch when I saw it, placed deliberately where I couldn't miss it. Inside was a piece of copper wire, twisted and bent from age. A shard of blue glass wrapped in cloth to protect the edges. And underneath, folded carefully, a child's drawing. The drawing showed two stick figures on a rooftop. Stars above. The letters C plus S written in careful block print at the bottom. Cristiano plus Shirley. I'd made that drawing when I was 9, given it to him the Christmas before he left. I'd thought it was lost forever, probably thrown away by the orphanage staff after he was adopted. But he'd kept it. For 20 years. Through everything he'd become. My hands shook as I lifted the drawing, saw how the creases had been pressed flat, how it had been stored with such care. This wasn't just a test. This was him showing me something he'd never shown anyone else. This was him saying, I remember. I've always remembered. I was still standing there holding the drawing when I heard footsteps behind me. That's mine. His voice. Right there. In the kitchen. I turned slowly. Cristiano stood in the doorway, still wearing his suit jacket, his expression unreadable. But his eyes, God, his eyes were burning with something that looked like fear and fury and heartbreak all at once. I know, I said softly. I drew it for you. Christmas 2005. The muscle in his jaw tightened. How did you get this job, Shirley? So we were doing this. Finally. After 3 weeks of tests and silence and pretending. I applied under my married name, I said. Right. Not Jameson. Your people never connected me to the orphanage. Married. The word came out flat. Divorced. 3 years now. I set the drawing back in the box carefully. I saw your picture in a news article 5 years ago. I spent a long time trying to convince myself to forget about it. About you. But I couldn't. Why not? Because I needed to know if you were still human. The words hung between us like a blade. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes flinched. And his voice was deadly soft. What's your conclusion? I don't know yet, I said honestly. You sleep better when I'm here. You keep drawings from when you were 12. You test me with objects instead of talking to me directly. I met his gaze, refusing to look away. You're either still human or you're very good at pretending to be. He moved into the kitchen, slow and deliberate, like a predator closing distance. Stopped 3 feet away. Close enough that I could see the gold flecks in his dark eyes, the small scar above his left eyebrow from when Marco had hit him with a rock. Do you know what I've done, Shirley? His voice was low, dangerous. The things I've ordered? The people who've died because I gave the command. Yes. And you came here anyway. Wore that ring in my house. Cooked meals that reminded me of being a child. He leaned closer, his presence overwhelming. Why? Because, I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. I needed to see if the boy who bled making me that ring still existed somewhere inside Il Lupo Nero. And because I thought maybe, after 20 years, I deserved to know why you never came back. His hand moved so fast I didn't see it coming. But instead of violence, his fingers caught my wrist, gentle but firm, turning my hand so the ring caught the light. I was 12 years old, he said, his thumb brushing the copper band. 12. Living in a nightmare, protecting a 9-year-old girl I had no business promising anything to. And then they came. The Grecos. Don Alessandro saw something in me. Potential for violence, probably. Orphans make good soldiers. We're already broken, already desperate. He offered me everything. Family. Power. Safety. All I had to do was forget who I'd been. His grip on my wrist tightened slightly. Not painful. Just desperate. I told myself I'd come back for you once I was strong enough. Once I had real power, real protection to offer. But they didn't just teach me their business, Shirley. They taught me that weakness gets you killed. And love. His laugh was bitter. Love was the ultimate weakness. So you buried it. I buried everything. He released my wrist, stepped back, his expression hardening. Cristiano Rossi died the day I took my first life at 18. What you're looking at now is just the thing that survived him. I don't believe that. You should. His voice turned cold, the warmth draining from his eyes. The boy who made you that ring would be horrified by what I've become. He'd look at this empire, these hands, and he wouldn't recognize himself. But you still kept the drawing, I said quietly. You still wear the scar from when you fought Marco for me. You still sleep better when I cook the meals we used to dream about. I took a step toward him, closing the distance he'd created. You can tell yourself you're a monster, Cristiano. But monsters don't keep drawings for 20 years. For a moment, just one heartbeat, I saw the 12-year-old boy flash across his face. Fear. Desperate. wanting so badly to believe he wasn't completely lost. Then the mask slammed back into place. "This was a mistake," he said. "You need to leave. Tonight." "No." His eyes narrowed. "That wasn't a request." "I know." I crossed my arms, channeling every ounce of courage I possessed. "But I'm not leaving until I get what I came for." "Which is?" "The truth." "Did any part of you want to keep that promise? Or was I just a convenient emotional anchor for a scared kid who needed to feel like he was capable of loving something?" The question landed like a physical blow. I saw it in the way his shoulders tensed, the way his hands curled into fists at his sides. "You want the truth?" He moved closer, backing me against the counter, his presence overwhelming. "Every single day for 20 years I thought about you. Every person I hurt, I wondered if you'd look at me with those same trusting eyes you had when you were 9. Every time I made a choice that took me further from who I was, I felt that ring like a weight around my neck even though I wasn't wearing it." His voice dropped to something raw and broken. "I knew where you were for 5 years, Shirley. 5 years. I had people watching you, keeping you safe from a distance, making sure nothing in my world touched yours. And I never came. Not once. Because I was too much of a coward to face what I'd become. And now," I whispered, "now you're standing in my kitchen wearing the only promise I ever kept, because you kept it for me, and I still don't know if I'm more afraid that you'll leave or that you'll stay." The air between us crackled with 20 years of silence, longing, and terror. "The summit is in 3 days, he said finally, stepping back. 5 families gathering here to prevent a war. It's going to be dangerous. I want you to stay in your quarters. Don't be seen. Don't." "I'll stay invisible," I interrupted. "Like always." Something pained crossed his face. "You were never invisible to me." Then he turned and walked out, leaving me standing in the kitchen with the wooden box and the drawing of 2 stick figures who'd believed in forever. That night I didn't hear him pacing. I heard glass breaking. Furniture moving. The sounds of a man destroying something because destroying himself wasn't an option. And I lay in my bed, touching the ring on my finger, wondering if either of us would survive what we'd become to each other. 3 days until the summit. 3 days until everything either shattered completely or somehow, impossibly, found a way to heal. After that conversation in the kitchen, everything changed. Cristiano didn't avoid me anymore. He didn't pretend I was just another piece of furniture in his carefully controlled world. Instead, he did something far more dangerous. He watched me openly. I'd be preparing breakfast and I'd feel his eyes on me from the doorway. I'd be cleaning the study and he'd be at his desk, not even pretending to work, just observing the way I moved through his space. During dinner service, he'd linger in the dining room, his food growing cold while he stared at my hands. Always my hands. Always the ring. The villa staff noticed. Antonio pulled me aside on the second day after the kitchen confrontation, worry etched into every line of his face. "Whatever is happening between you and the Dawn," he whispered urgently, "end it. No. Before the summit." "Nothing is happening," I lied. "Don't insult my intelligence, Shirley. I've worked for the Greco family for 15 years. I know when Don Cristiano is distracted. And distraction in this business gets people killed." He wasn't wrong. I'd heard the whispers among the staff, seen the way Cristiano's soldiers exchanged glances when he forgot to respond to reports, when he stared out windows instead of making decisions. Il Lupo Nero was showing weakness. And in his world, weakness was blood in the water. But I couldn't stop. Neither could he. We were locked in something that wasn't quite a confrontation and wasn't quite a reconciliation. Just 2 people circling each other, trying to figure out if 20 years had destroyed or preserved what we'd been. The morning before the summit, I found him in the garden. I'd gone out to cut fresh herbs for lunch and discovered him sitting on a stone bench beneath the olive trees, his jacket discarded, his shirt sleeves rolled up. He looked exhausted, like he'd been up all night. Probably had been. "I didn't mean to disturb you," I said, starting to retreat. "Stay." Not a command. A request. Softer than I'd ever heard him speak. I hesitated, then moved to the herb garden, keeping distance between us while I selected basil and rosemary. The silence stretched, broken only by birdsong and the distant sounds of the city. "Do you remember the roof?" he asked suddenly. My hands stilled on the rosemary stems. "Yes. We used to go up there after lights out. Sister Maria never knew, or if she did, she pretended not to notice. His voice carried something I'd never heard from him before: nostalgia. You'd point out constellations you'd learned from your parents. I'd make up stories about where we'd go when we finally escaped. You always said Rome, I said softly, straightening to look at him. You said you'd have a villa overlooking the city, and you'd eat pasta whenever you wanted, and no one would ever make you afraid again. His smile was bitter. Got the villa. Got the pasta. But the fear. He shook his head. That never goes away. It just changes shape. I set down my basket and moved closer, drawn by something in his expression. Sat on the bench, leaving space between us but less than before. What are you afraid of now? I asked. You. The word hung in the air like a confession. I'm afraid of you, Shirley. Afraid of what you see when you look at me. Afraid of what I feel when you're in the same room. Afraid that I've wanted you here so badly that I've put you in danger I can't protect you from. The summit. 5 families under one roof, all of them looking for any sign of weakness to exploit. And here I am, unable to stop thinking about a housekeeper who wears a ring I made when I still believed in promises. He finally looked at me and the vulnerability in his eyes nearly broke me. Antonio is right. You should leave before tomorrow. Go back to America. Forget about this. About me. I can't. Why not? Because I love you felt too simple for what I actually felt. How do you explain to someone that they're woven into your identity? That for 20 years the ring on your finger wasn't just jewelry. It was proof that you mattered once, that you were seen, that you were worth something to someone? Because I need to know how this ends, I said instead. Not the story we imagined on that roof. The real one. The one where you became this and I became whatever I am. I need to see if there's any way those two people find their way back to each other, or if that's just another fantasy we should have outgrown. His hand moved across the bench, slow and deliberate, until his fingers barely touched mine. Not holding, just connecting. I don't know if I can be what you need, he said quietly. I don't know if I need you to be anything except honest. His thumb traced the copper ring, the gesture so gentle it made my throat tight. I was honest in the kitchen. Every word. I think about you constantly. I dream about you. I wake up reaching for something that disappeared 20 years ago. His jaw clenched. But I'm also the man who ordered 3 executions last month. Who runs operations that destroy lives. Who builds power on fear and violence. Those things are true at the same time, Shirley. I don't know how to reconcile them. Maybe you're not supposed to reconcile them, I said. Maybe you're just supposed to decide which version of yourself you want to feed. He looked at me for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. Then he stood abruptly, pulling his hand away. The summit starts tomorrow at 6. Staff shortage means Antonio will need everyone working. You'll have to serve. My heart sank. You said I should stay invisible. I know what I said. His voice had gone hard again, controlled. But I also know how these events work. If you're not there, Antonio will struggle. If he struggles, people will notice. And noticed problems become larger problems. So I serve champagne to Mafia bosses. You stay as invisible as possible, you don't engage with anyone, and the moment the event is over, you go back to your quarters. He turned to face me fully. And Shirley, if anyone makes you uncomfortable, you find Antonio immediately. Or you find me. Why would Mafia bosses care about a housekeeper? His expression darkened. Because some men take any opportunity to assert dominance. And a Black American woman serving drinks to Italian crime families is exactly the kind of target they look for. The way he said it made my stomach turn. Not with fear for myself. I'd dealt with racist, sexist men my entire working life. But with understanding of what he was really saying, he was putting me in danger because logistics required it and he hated himself for it. I can handle myself, I said. I know you can. You've been handling yourself since you were 9 years old. He moved closer and I saw the conflict raging behind his eyes. But I'm asking you to be careful anyway. For me. Because if something happened to you in my house. He didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. Cristiano, I said softly. His name. Not Don Greco. Not Signore. Just him. He closed his eyes like the sound hurt him. I'll be careful, I promised. When he opened his eyes again, they were back to that controlled distance. Il Lupo Nero reasserting dominance over Cristiano Rossi. Good. Antonio will brief you on protocol tomorrow morning. Now go. I have preparations to make. I gathered my herbs and left him standing in the garden, surrounded by beauty his money had bought but looking more alone than he'd ever been in that cramped orphanage dormitory. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in my small bed and thought about tomorrow. About walking into a room full of dangerous men. About Cristiano watching me serve them while pretending I meant nothing to him. About the ring on my finger that connected us across 20 years and the impossible distance between who we'd been and who we'd become. Somewhere above me I heard footsteps. He was pacing again. Back and forth. Back and forth. Both of us, awake in the darkness, separated by 30 feet and everything we couldn't say. Tomorrow would change everything. I felt it in my bones. I just didn't know yet whether it would break us completely or finally force us to be honest about what we were to each other. The ring caught moonlight from my window, copper and turquoise glowing faintly. Promises made by children who'd believed in forever. We'd find out tomorrow if those promises had any power left.
I'll marry you.
The ballroom looked like controlled violence dressed in expensive decoration. 5 families. Their bosses, their wives, their most trusted soldiers. All gathered under Cristiano's roof with smiles that didn't reach their eyes and hands that stayed too close to where weapons were concealed. The air hummed with the kind of tension that comes right before lightning strikes. I moved through them like smoke, invisible in my simple black dress, offering champagne to people who barely glanced at me. This was what I'd trained for my entire adult life, disappearing into the background of wealthy people's events, essential but unremembered. Except I couldn't disappear here. Not completely. Because every time I entered Cristiano's field of vision, his eyes found me, tracked me across the room, followed my movement with an intensity that made my skin burn. He stood near the fireplace, surrounded by the other dons, discussing territory and operations in careful Italian that sounded polite but felt like knives being sharpened. He looked devastating in his tuxedo, every inch the powerful don who commanded respect and fear in equal measure. But I could see the tension in his shoulders. The way his hand kept flexing at his side. The muscle jumping in his jaw every time another man's gaze lingered on me too long. Greco, one of the other dons said, his voice carrying across the room, your hospitality is exceptional as always. Though I notice you've expanded your staff with some international flavor. His eyes were on me. Old, calculating, cruel. Cristiano's expression didn't change. I hire competence, Santoro. Perhaps you should try it. Laughter rippled through the group, but it was the wrong kind. The kind that said someone had just been cut and everyone was waiting to see if they'd bleed. Don Santoro's wife, Isabella, stood nearby. She was beautiful in the way that old money often is. Perfectly maintained, expensively dressed, wielding social cruelty like a scalpel. I'd seen her type before in New York. Women who'd been taught that their only power came from destroying other women. She caught her husband's slight, saw his jaw tighten with humiliation. And she did what such women always do, she looked for someone weaker to hurt. She found me. I was passing through the crowd with my tray when her voice rang out, sharp and carrying. You there? With the drinks. I stopped, turned, kept my expression neutral. Yes, signora? Come here. Every instinct I'd developed over 20 years of service screamed at me to refuse. But refusing would cause a scene. Would reflect badly on Cristiano. Would give these people exactly what they were looking for. Evidence of poor control. So I walked over to where Isabella stood with 3 other women, all of them dripping in diamonds and designer labels. Let me see your hand, Isabella demanded. I shifted the tray to my left hand, extended my right. My pulse thundered in my ears, but I kept my face carefully blank. Isabella grabbed my wrist with perfectly manicured fingers, held it up for her companions to see. Ladies, look at this. The help is wearing jewelry. Her friends laughed, the sound like glass breaking. And what jewelry it is, Isabella continued, her voice soaked in contempt. Is this copper? Is that glass? She examined the ring with exaggerated fascination. How quaint. How very American. More laughter. I saw Cristiano turn toward us across the room, his entire body going rigid. It's just a ring, signora, I said quietly, trying to extract my hand. Her grip tightened. Just a ring? Dokar. This is a cry for help. No woman should be seen wearing trash like this. Let me do you a favor. She yanked the ring off my finger in one vicious motion. Time slowed. I watched the copper band arc through the air, the turquoise stone catching light as it tumbled. 20 years of promises, 20 years of faith, 20 years of proof that I'd mattered to someone, flying across the room like garbage. There, Isabella said, her smile victorious. Much better. You'll thank me later when you realize I saved you from the embarrassment. I didn't hear the rest. The ring hit the marble floor with a sound that somehow cut through all the noise, champagne glasses, conversation, laughter. It bounced twice, rolled under a nearby table. My composure shattered. The tray slipped from my hands. Crystal exploded against marble, champagne spreading in golden pools. I dropped to my knees instantly, crawling toward the table, my dress soaking up alcohol and my dignity abandoned. I had to find it. Had to. That ring was more than jewelry. It was every night I'd worn it to remind myself I was worth bleeding for. Every day I'd looked at it and remembered that once someone had thought I deserved beauty. Every moment over 20 years when that small piece of copper had been the only thing keeping me from forgetting who I'd been before the world taught me to disappear. Look at her. Isabella's voice dripped poison above me. Scrambling on the floor like a dog. Americans have no dignity. Her friends laughed. Others joined in. I heard whispers, comments, the sounds of phones emerging to capture the spectacle. I didn't care. My hands swept across the floor, searching desperately under the table, tears blurring my vision. Then the laughter stopped. The entire room went silent in a way that made my skin prickle. That particular quality of quiet that comes when a predator enters a space and every prey animal freezes. I looked up from under the table. Cristiano was walking toward me. Not the careful, controlled walk he usually employed. This was something else. Purposeful. Dangerous. Every person between him and me stepped aside instinctively, creating a path. The other dons watched. The wives watched. The soldiers positioned around the room tensed, hands moving subtly toward weapons. He walked past Isabella without acknowledging her existence. Walked past the other families, the whispered comments, the phones raced to capture whatever happened next. He walked directly to where I knelt on the floor. And then Al Lupo Nero, the Black Wolf, the Don who made grown men beg for their lives, lowered himself to his knees beside me on the cold marble. The room held its breath. His hand reached under the table, steady and sure, finding the ring where I couldn't. He pulled it out carefully, copper and turquoise resting in his palm like something precious. He turned to me, his dark eyes holding mine, and for just a moment I didn't see the Don. I saw the 12-year-old boy who'd bled making this ring. Who'd promised me forever when forever felt impossible. Cristiano took my hand gently. So gently. Like I was something that mattered. He slid the ring back onto my finger exactly where it belonged. Are you hurt? He asked softly, just for me. I shook my head, unable to speak past the tightness in my throat. He stood then, helping me to my feet with his hand still holding mine. Then he turned to face the room and the dawn returned, cold, lethal, absolute. The silence was deafening. This ring, his voice carried across the ballroom with perfect clarity, is worth more than every blood diamond in this room combined. It was made by a 12-year-old orphan who had nothing except the desperate need to give something beautiful to someone who deserved it. He paused, letting that sink in. Letting everyone see him holding the hand of his housekeeper, defending her in front of the most powerful criminals in Europe. And you, he turned to Isabella Santoro with the kind of look that made people start praying, just insulted the woman wearing it. In front of me. In my house. Isabella's face had gone white. Don Greco, I wasn't aware. Leave. One word. Colder than winter. Please, I apologize, I didn't mean to. Leave my house. He took a step toward her and even I could feel the threat radiating from him. And don't expect any future invitations to anything bearing my name. Your husband will hear exactly why. Isabella gathered her clutch with shaking hands, looking to her husband for support. Don Santoro stood frozen, his face unreadable, but he didn't move to help her. She walked toward the exit alone, her heels clicking in the absolute silence. No one followed. No one spoke. When the door closed behind her, Cristiano turned back to me. Are you all right? He asked again, his voice gentle despite the entire room watching. I nodded, my hand still in his, the ring back where it belonged. Go to the kitchen, he said quietly. You're done for the evening. Don Greco, I started. Please. Just that one word, but the way he said it made my heart crack. Please go. I pulled my hand from his, picked up my tray from the floor, and walked toward the kitchen with as much dignity as I could salvage. Behind me, I heard Cristiano address the room, his voice carrying that dangerous edge that reminded everyone exactly who they were dealing with. If anyone else has comments about my household staff, I suggest you keep them to yourself. This summit is about preventing a war, not starting one. Understood. Murmured agreements. Shuffling. The careful resumption of a party that would never fully recover from what had just happened. I made it to the kitchen before my legs gave out. Antonio caught me, his face pale. What were you thinking? He whispered urgently. What is he thinking? I don't know, I said honestly. But I did know one thing. Cristiano Greco had just shown his weakness to every dangerous person in his world. He'd knelt for me, defended me, valued me publicly, which meant I was either the most protected person in Rome, or the biggest target. I was gone before sunrise. Leaving wasn't a decision I made in that moment. It was a decision I'd been making since the second Cristiano knelt beside me on that marble floor. Since he'd looked at me like I was worth destroying his reputation for. Since he'd announced to every dangerous person in his world that I mattered to him. He'd given me power I never wanted and put a target on my back I couldn't survive. So I packed my small bag in the dark, left the villa through the servants' entrance, and walked into the Roman dawn carrying nothing but my clothes and the ring that had caused everything. But I couldn't leave without explanation. Couldn't let him wake up and find me simply vanished, the way he'd vanished from my life 20 years ago. I'd written the letter in my quarters after the summit ended, after I'd heard him pace upstairs until the pacing stopped and something shattered, glass, furniture, I couldn't tell. After I'd understood that what happened in that ballroom had changed everything and nothing all at once. I left it on his desk exactly where he'd placed the orphanage photograph. Cristiano. I did not come here for money. I did not come to demand the promise you made 20 years ago. I came because after all this time I needed to know what kind of man you had become. I needed to see if the boy who shared his last piece of bread with me still existed somewhere inside the dawn everyone fears. Now I know. What you did tonight was more than I ever expected. More than I had any right to hope for. You defended me when it could have started a war. You knelt in front of people who respect only strength and you showed them something that looked like weakness but was actually the bravest thing I've ever seen. But I cannot stay. Not because you left me behind all those years ago. I made peace with that long before I walked through your door. You were 12 years old and terrified and someone offered you everything you'd ever wanted. I would have done the same thing. I understand why you chose the car. I forgave you for it years ago. I cannot stay because if I do I will become the woman who waits. The woman who hopes. The woman who builds her life around someone else's choices and someone else's violence. I spent 20 years learning not to be that woman. I will not unlearn it now. You live in a world I cannot survive. Every person in that ballroom tonight saw what you did. They saw you care about something. And in your world, caring is the same as bleeding. They will use me to hurt you. They will threaten me to control you. They will see this ring on my finger and understand exactly how to destroy you. I won't be that weapon. The ring you gave me is the only proof that someone once loved me enough to make a promise. It doesn't matter that the promise was broken. It matters that it was made. It matters that for 20 years, this small piece of copper reminded me that I was worth bleeding for. That I was seen. That I mattered. Thank you for kneeling. Thank you for showing me that the boy from the roof still exists, even if he's buried under everything you had to become to survive. Thank you for remembering. But please don't look for me. Your world will destroy us both if you do. Surely. I took a bus to Naples. Rented a small apartment in Spaccanapoli, the old neighborhood where tourists got lost and locals knew how to mind their business. It was close to where the orphanage had been. Casa dei Bambini was gone now, replaced by modern condos, but the streets still felt familiar. I got a job at a local church helping with their meal program for the homeless. It wasn't much, but it was clean. Honest. Far away from Mafia summits and marble floors and men who knelt in front of their enemies. 3 days passed. I didn't sleep. Couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes I saw him walking toward me across that ballroom. Saw the way his hand had trembled slightly when he slid the ring back on my finger. Saw the fear in his eyes when he'd asked if I was all right. Saw the truth he'd finally admitted. I was his weakness. And I knew with absolute certainty that loving him would get one or both of us killed. On the 4th morning someone knocked on my door. I knew who it was before I opened it. Felt it in the way my heart started racing, in the way my hand went automatically to the ring on my finger. Cristiano stood in my doorway wearing an old jacket I'd never seen him in. No bodyguards. No designer suit. No trace of Il Lupo Nero. Just a man who looked like he hadn't slept in 4 days. "You found me," I said. His voice was rough, exhausted. "I always knew where you were." The words hit like a physical blow. "What?" 5 years ago when I had investigators find everyone from the orphanage. "Baltimore. Your marriage. Your divorce. Your job cleaning houses for Manhattan's elite." He swallowed hard. "I've known exactly where you were for 5 years, Shirley. I had people keeping you safe from a distance. Making sure nothing from my world ever touched yours. You've been watching me for 5 years," I said slowly. "And you never came. I was too much of a coward. But now you're here. Because I don't want to be a coward anymore." He looked at me with something raw and desperate in his eyes. "Not for one more day. I should have closed the door. Should have protected both of us from what came next. But instead I stepped back. Come in." My apartment felt too small with him in it. Not because of his physical size, though he was tall, commanding space the way men who've learned to dominate always do. But because his presence filled every corner with the weight of everything we'd been, everything we'd become, everything we could never be. He stood in the center of my small living room, looking impossibly out of place among my second-hand furniture and potted plants. His jacket was worn, older than anything I'd seen him wear at the villa. It didn't fit quite right, hung on him like a memory of a different body, a different life. "That jacket," I said softly. "You've had it a long time. Since I was 16. He touched the collar like checking if it was still real. "I was wearing it the night before the Grecos came. Grew out of it by 18, but I couldn't throw it away." His smile was bitter. "Turns out monsters are sentimental. You're not a monster. You don't know that." He moved to the window, looked out at Spaccanapoli stretching below. "You don't know what I've done, Shirley. What I've ordered. The people who've died because I decided they were problems that needed solving." "Then tell me." He turned and I saw something crack in his expression. "Why? So you can confirm what you already suspect? That the boy from the orphanage is dead and I'm just wearing his skin?" "No." I moved closer, drawn by the pain in his voice. "So I can decide if the man in front of me is worth knowing. Because I already know the boy was." For a long moment he just stared at me. Then he sank onto my worn couch, elbows on his knees, head in his hands. "When I was 12 I thought power meant safety," he said quietly. "That if I was strong enough, feared enough, I'd never have to be that terrified orphan again. So when the Grecos offered me everything I took it. I buried Cristiano Rossi and became what they needed me to be." He looked up and his eyes were haunted. "My first kill was at 18. A man who'd stolen from the family. Don Alessandro handed me the gun, told me it was time to prove my loyalty. I remember standing there looking at this man who was begging, pleading and thinking about you. About the promise I'd made. About how the boy who'd made that ring would never do what I was about to do. But you did it anyway." I pulled the trigger. And something inside me died with him. His voice was hollow. That's when I understood. Being Cristiano Greco meant killing Cristiano Rossi completely. No mercy. No weakness. No room for the boy who'd believed in promises. He stood, paced to the window again, his reflection ghostly in the glass. "I built an empire on that foundation. Every decision I made took me further from who I'd been. Every person I hurt, every operation I ran, every time I chose power over humanity, it all stacked up. 20 years of choices that led me further into darkness. And yet you kept the drawing," I said. "You kept the photograph. You slept better when I cooked meals from the orphanage. Because some stupid part of me couldn't let go completely." He turned to face me and the vulnerability in his expression made my chest ache. "Every night for 20 years I'd lie awake and think about you. Wonder if you were safe. If you were happy. If you still wore the ring or if you'd finally thrown it away like you should have. I never took it off. I know. My people sent me photos. Reports. Details about your life, your marriage, your divorce, your job. I knew what you ate for breakfast, Shirley. I knew your favorite coffee shop in Brooklyn. I knew everything except how to face you. The confession hung between us like smoke. Why not?" I asked. "Why watch for 5 years but never approach? Because I was afraid. He moved closer, stopped an arm's length away. Close enough that I could see the gold flecks in his dark eyes, the small scar above his eyebrow. Afraid you'd look at me and see a monster. Afraid you wouldn't. Afraid that if I came back into your life my world would destroy you. But mostly. His voice broke slightly. Mostly I was afraid that you'd forgive me. That you'd look past everything I'd become and still see the boy from the roof. Because that would mean I'd have to face what I'd done. Who I'd killed. What I'd sacrificed. All of it for power I didn't even want anymore. Do you want it now? I don't know what I want anymore except. He reached out slowly, gave me time to pull away. When I didn't, his fingers found my hand, traced the copper ring gently. Except this. Except the woman wearing a promise I made when I still believed in forever. Except the only person in the world who knew me before I learned how to kill. Cristiano, I whispered. I came here to tell you the truth, he said. Not to ask for forgiveness or make promises I might not keep. Just to be honest for once. His thumb brushed across my knuckles. I've known where you were for 5 years and I watched you from a distance like a coward. I hired you as my housekeeper because I needed to see if you'd recognize me, if any part of what we'd been still mattered. I tested you with objects instead of talking to you because I was terrified of what you'd say if I asked directly. He took a shaky breath. And when I knelt beside you in that ballroom it wasn't because I was brave. It was because watching Isabella hurt you broke something in me that 20 years of violence hadn't managed to destroy. I knelt because in that moment I stopped being Don Greco and became the 12-year-old boy who would have burned the world down to keep you safe. Tears slid down my face. I didn't wipe them away. What are you asking for? I said. I don't know. His voice was raw, honest. I don't know if there's any way for a man like me to deserve a woman like you. I don't know if loving you is selfish or if it's the only decent thing I've done in 20 years. I just know that I'm tired of being a coward. Tired of watching from a distance. Tired of pretending that any part of my empire matters as much as this. He pulled something from his jacket pocket, a small cloth bundle. Unwrapped it carefully to reveal copper wire and a small turquoise stone. I want to make you another ring, he said quietly. Not to replace this one. Never to replace it. But to prove that the man I am now, with all the blood on his hands and all the terrible choices he's made, is still capable of creating something beautiful. That some part of the boy you knew survived. My composure cracked completely. I pressed my hand to my mouth, trying to hold back the sob building in my chest. I don't need another ring, Cristiano. I know. But I need to make it. He set the bundle on my coffee table. I need to know if I can still bleed for beauty instead of violence. If these hands can make something other than death. I looked at him, really looked at him. Saw the exhaustion in his face, the weight of 20 years of choices. The desperate hope that maybe somehow he wasn't completely lost. And I saw the 12-year-old boy underneath. Trying so hard to be brave. Wanting so badly to believe he was worth something. Why now? I asked. Why not 5 years ago when you found me? Why not 20 years ago when you could have said goodbye? Because 5 years ago I was still trying to convince myself I didn't need you. 20 years ago I was too young and too afraid to understand what I was giving up. He met my eyes. And now I've spent 4 days destroying my study, firing anyone who looked at me wrong, and driving to Naples without my security because I finally understood something. What? That every choice I've made for 20 years has been about building power. But power is just fear and expensive clothing. And I'm done being afraid. He took my hand fully now, held it like it was something precious. I'm here because the only time in 20 years I felt like anything more than a killer was when a 9-year-old girl tore her dress to bandage my bleeding hands. And I'm betting everything that some version of that girl still exists in the woman standing in front of me. She does, I whispered. But she's scared too. Scared of what loving you means. Scared of your world. Scared that caring about you is signing both our death warrants. Probably is. His smile was sad. My enemies saw what happened at the summit. They know you matter. Which means you're a target now whether you're with me or not. That's supposed to convince me to stay? No. I'm not trying to convince you of anything. He released my hand, stepped back. I just needed you to know the truth. All of it. What I've done. What I am. What you mean to me. And then you can decide if the man standing in front of you is worth the risk. Or if you should run as far from me as possible and never look back. He moved toward my door, reaching for the handle. If you leave, I said suddenly, where will you go? He paused. Back to Rome. Back to the Empire. Back to being what everyone needs me to be. And if I ask you to stay? He turned slowly and the hope in his eyes nearly destroyed me. Then I stay, he said simply. For as long as you'll have me. I looked at the copper wire and turquoise stone on my table. Looked at this man who'd spent 20 years becoming a monster but couldn't stop carrying a 16-year-old's jacket. Who'd ordered executions but kept a child's drawing for 2 decades. Who'd knelt in front of his enemies because someone had hurt me. Looked at the ring on my finger that I'd worn every day for 20 years because it reminded me I was worth bleeding for. Then stay, I said. And make me another ring. He made the ring on my kitchen table while I watched. His hands shook at first. Whether from nerves or from muscle memory of violence I couldn't tell. But as he worked, wrapping the copper wire around the turquoise stone with careful precision, something in his face changed. It became almost peaceful. The first time I did this, he said quietly, focused on his work, I was in the orphanage basement. Middle of winter, freezing cold. I'd stolen the wire from the maintenance closet and found the stone in the courtyard. He glanced up briefly. You were upstairs sleeping. Didn't know I was making this. Didn't know I'd been planning it for weeks. Why? Because Christmas was coming and I knew neither of us would get presents. The orphanage didn't have money for things like that. His fingers worked the wire with surprising gentleness. And I thought, if I could give you something beautiful, even something small, maybe you'd know you mattered. That you weren't just another forgotten kid. He was quiet for a moment, concentrating on a particularly difficult twist. I cut my hand on the wire. Bled all over the basement floor. And when you found me the next morning, you didn't ask why I was bleeding. You just tore a strip from your dress and bandaged my hand like it was the most natural thing in the world. I remember, I said softly. You tried to hide it from me. But I saw the blood on the copper wire before you could clean it. You never said anything. I knew you were making something. I didn't want to ruin the surprise. He smiled. A real smile, small but genuine. You never opened the presents under your foster family's Christmas tree with as much joy as you showed when I gave you this ring. Like I'd given you diamonds instead of trash. It wasn't trash. It was everything. His hands stilled on the wire. I felt like the richest person alive when you put it on. Like I'd accomplished something that mattered. He looked up at me and his eyes were wet. That feeling lasted exactly 2 weeks. Until the Grecos came and I chose their money over your smile. You chose survival. I chose wrong. He returned to the ring, his movements more deliberate now. Every day for 20 years I've known I chose wrong. Built an empire trying to convince myself I hadn't. Became the most powerful Don in Rome trying to prove that power was worth what I'd sacrificed. His voice broke slightly. But it wasn't. None of it was worth losing you. I moved closer, sat beside him at the table. Close enough that our shoulders touched. Tell me about the first time you killed someone, I said quietly. He flinched but didn't stop working. Why? Because I need to know all of you. Not just the boy from the orphanage. The man you became. He was silent for a long time, his hands mechanically wrapping wire, twisting, shaping. His name was Paolo, he finally said. 43 years old. Had a wife, 2 kids. Stole from the family, not much, couple thousand euros. But Don Alessandro said theft was theft and examples had to be made. Cristiano's jaw clenched. I was 18. Alessandro handed me a gun, told me it was time to become a man. Paolo was on his knees, begging. Saying he was sorry. That his daughter needed surgery. That he'd pay it back. He paused, examining his work with eyes that weren't really seeing. I remember thinking about you. About how the boy who'd made you a ring could never do this. How pulling that trigger would mean killing that boy forever. His voice went hollow. And then I pulled it anyway. Because I was more afraid of disappointing Alessandro than I was of becoming a murderer. Did it get easier? Yes. That's what terrifies me most. He finally looked at me. The first few times I couldn't sleep. Couldn't eat. Saw their faces every time I closed my eyes. But eventually it just became part of the job. Another problem solved. Another threat eliminated. I stopped seeing them as people and started seeing them as obstacles. But you still couldn't sleep. No. He returned his attention to the ring. Because Paolo's face was gone but yours wasn't. You were the one ghost I couldn't kill. The one reminder that I used to be human. I watched his hands work the copper wire, saw the way he handled it so carefully despite everything those hands had done. What changed? I asked. Between being the man who didn't see them as people and the man sitting in my kitchen making a ring? You did. He twisted the final loop, held up the completed ring for inspection. It was beautiful, clumsy in the way handmade things are beautiful, imperfect but honest. The moment I saw you in my villa wearing the first ring, something cracked. Like a wall I'd built around Cristiano Rossi finally broke and he started screaming loud enough that I couldn't ignore him anymore. He turned the ring in his fingers, examining it from different angles. I've been two people for 20 years, Shirley. The Don who makes terrible choices because they're profitable. And the boy who just wanted to protect one 9-year-old girl and make her feel safe. He met my eyes. Being around you, it made those two people collide. Made me face what I'd become. And for the first time in 20 years, I had to decide which version of myself I wanted to feed. And which did you choose? I'm sitting in your kitchen making a ring instead of running my empire. His smile was sad. I think that's my answer. He reached for my left hand, the opposite of where I wore the first ring. Held my hand gently, his thumb brushing across my knuckles. This isn't an engagement ring, he said quietly. This isn't a promise that I'll be perfect or that I won't mess this up. This is just proof. Proof that the boy who bled for you still exists. Proof that even after 20 years of choosing wrong, I'm capable of choosing you. He slid the ring onto my finger. The copper was still warm from his hands, the turquoise stone catching the kitchen light. And then I saw it, blood on his palm. He'd cut himself again, the wire reopening the same scars he'd earned making the first ring. I grabbed his hand, examined the cut. Not deep but bleeding steadily. 20 years apart and he was still bleeding for me. Without thinking, I grabbed the nearest cloth, one of his expensive linen handkerchiefs that he'd been carrying in his jacket. Tore a strip from it deliberately, meeting his eyes as I did. What are you? What I should have done 20 years ago. I wrapped the linen around his bleeding hand, tied it carefully. Remind you that you're worth bleeding for too. He stared at the bandage, at the ruined handkerchief, at me. Then he pulled me against him and held on like I was the only thing keeping him from drowning. I don't deserve you, he whispered into my hair. Probably not. I held him just as tightly. But I'm not sure either of us gets to decide what we deserve anymore. Maybe we just get to decide what we're willing to fight for. I'll fight for this, he said. For you. For the chance to be something other than what I've been. It won't be easy. Your world. My world will adjust. Or it won't, and I'll burn it down. He pulled back enough to look at me. I'm done choosing power over you, Shirley. Done being afraid. Done being a coward. I touched his face, traced the scar above his eyebrow from when Marco had hit him with a rock. Then stay, I said. Not for a night. Not for a week. Stay and we'll figure out how to build something that isn't built on violence. Something that's just us. Just us, he repeated like testing the words. I don't know if I remember how to be just us. Then we'll learn together. He kissed me then, soft, careful, like I was something precious that might break. Maybe I was. Maybe we both were. Two people broken by the world trying to figure out if the pieces still fit together. When he pulled away, I saw tears on his face. Thank you, he whispered. For what? For not giving up on me. For wearing my promise for 20 years. For walking into my house and forcing me to face who I'd become. For... His voice broke. For seeing the boy underneath the monster and deciding he was worth saving. You saved yourself, Cristiano. I just reminded you why. We sat there in my small kitchen holding each other, both of us wearing rings made by a boy who'd believed in promises. And for the first time in 20 years, the future didn't feel impossible. 6 months later, the villa looked different. Not structurally. The marble was still too white, the hallways still stretched like arteries. But there were plants now. Everywhere. Potted herbs in the kitchen. Flowering vines on the balconies. The small succulents I'd brought from Naples lined every windowsill like evidence that life could grow in spaces built for violence. Cristiano called it an invasion. I called it healing. You're turning my house into a greenhouse, he said one evening, finding me on the terrace with another potted basil plant. Your house needed softening. I placed the pot carefully between the rosemary and oregano. Everything in here was hard edges and control. Plants force you to surrender a little. To adapt. To let something else dictate the pace. He moved behind me, wrapped his arms around my waist, rested his chin on my shoulder. 6 months ago this casual intimacy would have been impossible. Now it felt natural. I like surrendering to you, he murmured. Liar. You hate every minute of it. True. But I'm learning. He turned me in his arms. How was the church today? I'd kept my job at the meal program in Naples, driving there 3 times a week to serve food and help coordinate volunteers. Cristiano had offered to fund the entire operation, let me throw money at something that actually helps people. But I'd refused. Some things couldn't be solved with Mafia money. Good. Father Pietro asked about you again. I'm not confessing to a priest, Shirley. I didn't say you had to. But he knows who you are. What you've done. And he still invites you to volunteer. I traced the line of his jaw. That's called grace. You could try accepting it. I'm working on it. He was working on a lot of things. The first month after Naples had been brutal. Cristiano had returned to Rome, to his empire, to all the obligations that came with being Don. But something fundamental had shifted. He delegated more. Refused operations that dealt in human suffering. Started quietly extracting the Greco family from their most violent enterprises. You're going to get yourself killed, his lieutenant had warned him after Cristiano shut down their trafficking operations. Probably, Cristiano had agreed. But I'm done building power on other people's pain. The other families noticed. Started testing him, pushing boundaries, looking for weakness. There'd been 2 attempts on his life in the past 6 months. 1 poisoning, 1 ambush. He'd survived both, but barely. And every time he came home bleeding or bruised, he'd find me on this terrace tending plants and he'd say the same thing, still worth it. Tell me something, I said now, looking up at him. Do you regret it? Any of it? The 20 years of violence? Every day. His hand came up to cup my face. Finding you again? Not for a second. Even when you're getting shot at? Especially then. Because getting shot at for trying to be better is worth more than living safely as a monster. I kissed him softly. 6 months and I still couldn't quite believe this was real. That the boy from the orphanage had found his way back. That the man who'd built an empire on fear was learning how to build a life on something else. Show me, I said. He knew what I meant. Took my left hand, examined the 2 rings I wore side by side. The original, copper worn smooth by 20 years, turquoise stone chipped at the corner. And the new one, slightly clumsy but beautiful, carrying the weight of everything we'd survived to get here. Do you know what I see when I look at these? He asked quietly. What? Proof that some promises survive. Not because they were kept perfectly, but because someone refused to forget them. He pressed a kiss to my ringed finger. You wore the first one for 20 years when you had every reason to throw it away. That kept me human when I'd forgotten how to be. And the second one. He traced the newer ring. This is proof that even after everything, I'm still capable of creating beauty instead of destruction. You're getting sentimental, Don Greco. I'm getting honest. He pulled me closer. For 20 years I told myself that power was safety. That being feared meant being strong. But you know what I learned? What? That the strongest thing I ever did was kneel on a marble floor in front of my enemies to retrieve a ring for a woman I love. Everything else, the empire, the money, the fear, that was just cowardice and expensive clothing. You love me. Not a question. We'd said it before, whispered it in the dark, but hearing it in daylight still made my heart race. Desperately. Completely. In a way that terrifies me and makes me grateful all at once. His smile was soft. You're the only thing in my life I didn't steal or kill or manipulate for. You're just mine. Because you chose to be. And that makes you more valuable than every empire I've built. I pressed my face against his chest, listened to his heartbeat. Steady, alive, human. What happens now? I asked. With your family? The other Dons. They'll keep testing me. Keep looking for weaknesses. Eventually they'll probably find one. He was quiet for a moment. But I've made arrangements. Legal businesses to transition into. Money in accounts they can't touch. An exit strategy if it comes to that. You'd walk away from it all? For you? In a heartbeat. He pulled back to look at me seriously. I'm not naive, Shirley. I know what I've done, who I've hurt. That blood doesn't wash off just because I want it to. But I can stop adding to it. I can work towards something better. And maybe if I'm very lucky and live long enough, I can do more good than harm before I die. That's very optimistic for a mafia boss. I blame you. You keep reminding me that redemption is possible. I touched his face, traced the lines that 20 years of violence had carved there. Not redemption. His becoming. You're not trying to erase who you were. You're just choosing who you want to be next. And you'll stay with me while I figure that out? As long as you keep bleeding for beauty instead of violence. He held up his hand, the scar from making the second ring still visible across his palm. Deal. We stood there on the terrace as the sun painted Rome in shades of gold and amber. The city spread below us, ancient and eternal, holding space for both beauty and violence, forgiveness and consequence. Somewhere in that city, men were making deals that would hurt people. Somewhere violence was being planned. Cristiano's world hadn't disappeared just because he'd stepped back from it. But up here on this terrace, surrounded by plants that insisted on growing in impossible places, we'd created something different. Something small but precious. A 12-year-old boy had promised a 9-year-old girl forever when forever felt impossible. 20 years later, they were learning that forever wasn't a destination. It was a choice. Made every day in small moments, in tended plants and handmade rings, and the decision to bleed for beauty. Do you know what Father Pietro told me today? I asked. He said grace isn't about erasing what you've done. It's about accepting that you're worthy of love despite it. Cristiano was quiet for a long moment. Then, I'm not sure I'll ever believe I'm worthy of you. Good. I kissed him softly. That means you'll keep trying to deserve it. And trying is all any of us can do. The rings on my finger caught the fading sunlight, copper and turquoise glowing like promises. 2 rings. One made by a boy who'd believed in forever. One made by a man learning to believe again. Both of them proof that some promises survive not because they were kept perfectly, but because someone refused to let innocence die completely. Stay with me, Cristiano whispered. Always, I whispered back. And on a terrace in Rome, surrounded by plants that insisted on growing, 2 orphans who'd believed in promises found their way home to each other. Not because the path was easy, but because they'd both refused to forget who they'd been before the world taught them to survive. If this story touched your heart, I'd love for you to share it. Because sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is remember that monsters are just people who forgot how to be human. And that love, real, complicated, imperfect love, can remind them. Have you ever made a promise you couldn't keep? Or maybe someone made a promise to you that they broke. How did you find peace with it? Share your story in the comments. Sometimes the most healing thing we can do is know we're not alone. Thank you for listening. I'll see you in the next one.
For you.